The following presentation was recorded live at the 2015 National Bioneers Conference. To learn more about Bioneers programs and media products, visit www.bioneers.org.
Okay, welcome. Welcome. My name's Amy Cannon, and I unfortunately have to let you know that John Warner is not here for this session. He's okay. He did spend a little time in the hospital this week, and but he's fine. So he's recovering, and he just couldn't travel, and it was really unfortunate timing, but he is fine. So my colleague Kate Anderson is stepping in to we're gonna have a little tag team partner here to talk to you guys today about green chemistry and biomimicry. So John apologizes that he can't be here. We apologize because he is hugely inspirational. If you did have a chance, to see him on the main stage last year or some of the years past, he's a wonderful speaker. So hopefully we can do some justice here to it. So again, my name's Amy Cannon, and this is Kate Anderson, and we are from an organization called Beyond Benign. I co-founded that with John. So John is a partner in a few ways. We're partners. So we're also husband and wife. So that, I usually don't lead with that, but it's a reality. Yeah. So I've got a few of his slides in here too, so I can talk about some of his technology. So today we're going to talk to you about green chemistry and biomimicry and sort of the intersection of these two sciences, really, and how the value of that together and the power of that together. And then we're going to go into some how to apply this in education. So this is our agenda today. We're going to talk a little bit about us. I'm going to do an introduction to biomimicry and green chemistry. I know many of you are probably very familiar, especially with biomimicry and the wonderful, awe-inspiring examples that are out there. So I'm going to touch upon that. And then I'll bridge into green chemistry and how they're related. And then I'm going to hand it over to Kate, who's our Director of Education at Beyond Benign, and she's going to get into more of the details of some of our resources that are out there as well. So our organization was founded in 2007, so we're 8 years or so old, and here's our big picture mission and vision. We have no small challenge in front of us to really transform the way chemistry is taught and learned. Because we see chemistry as really essential in solving so many of the sustainability challenges that we have today. So this is our big picture mission and vision. We're fortunate to be co-located. By the way, we're located just north of Boston, and we're co-located with the Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry. So when John and I, we were both faculty members at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell, and when we had an opportunity to leave, we started two organizations. Warner Babcock, who focuses on invention. It's the first research institution of its kind that's solely dedicated to inventing green chemistry alternatives and getting them out there in the market and working with industry. So I'll talk a little bit about some examples coming out of there. And then Beyond Benign. So we focus on all the education work around green chemistry. Because if you think about, and I'm going to touch upon this too, change has to happen in companies and in industry and all of that. But education is so an essential piece to that change. Because if we're not changing how we educate, we're not going to see much change at all further on down the line. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we have a pretty large space. We have 42,000 square feet of space. If you do come to the Boston area, come on by. Just shoot us an email. You're welcome to come visit. We have 42,000 square feet of space. Most of it's research space. This square, this wing of the building, is our space. So we have 5 small offices over here, and then we have a classroom where we can actually bring students in. We host field trips. We train teachers in this space. And it's a really great opportunity as well to introduce students to the science of green chemistry and meet some scientists and understand more about what being a scientist actually means. And so it's another benefit for us being co-located with Warner Babcock. So our organization On the education side of things, we focus in 3 main areas: K through 12 education, which we're going to touch mostly upon today. Kate's going to talk a lot more about that. Green chemistry outreach. If you have a chance to visit the Family Fair site, you'll see some of our outreach in action. So we've got some wonderful student volunteers from UC Berkeley, as well as a number of other volunteers over there that are helping lead some outreach activities and working with kids right over in the Family Fair there. And some hands-on green chemistry and biomimicry in action over there. And we also have a higher ed program, because again, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but this is really focused on transforming chemistry education in colleges and universities. So I'm going to take a step back and start with biomimicry. You've probably seen a lot of these images up here. Biomimicry is hugely inspiring, and if you've seen Janine Benyus speak and seen some of her talks, absolutely amazing and hugely inspiring. And but that's nature, right? Nature. If we take a look and observe all of the amazing things that are out there. So the blue amorphous butterfly. I think Kate's going to talk about that one in a little bit. We have a lotus leaf, which is inspiring self-cleaning surfaces because of the surface structure of the lotus leaf. We have our seaweed that's inspired by the Pax fan, which is amazingly efficient fan. We have our beetle here, which you are or are not going to be talking about. Not. I love this one. It's chemistry. So this little guy lives in the desert, and he has these little bumps on his back that are hydrophilic and hydrophobic. So for you chemistry nerds in the room, this is just super, super interesting. And he harvests, if you look at him, you can actually see beads of water dripping off of his back, because these hydrophobic and hydrophilic surfaces actually harness the water out of these really arid climates. And there's a company that's actually created similar structures to harvest, a liter of water a day in these really dry climates, so freshwater sources. Our medicines are, in the way we cure ourselves, oftentimes are inspired by indigenous cultures or by animals that observing them and actually figuring out how they cure themselves. It's very rarely is it actually a eureka moment in a lab, and a scientist sort of comes up with something out of the blue. Oftentimes it's just by looking and observing. And so we have this wealth of information out there through biomimicry that is just amazing. And again, Janine Benyus, this is all her work and her organization, which I'm sure you're familiar with as well. Still an amazing book and an amazing, amazing person. So with that, I'm going to give you a few examples of biomimicry in action. Wow, some of my stuff is up here. So there's a smiling beetle up there, which looks a little odd. I'll talk a little bit about what that is. He's very happy. So these are some, here, I'm just going to, oh, wait, sorry. So here's my beetle. So these are some examples that are coming out of the Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry. This one is actually a collaboration with Paul Hawken, who was on the main stage today. And this is inspired by beetles and the bug sclerotization process. So these beetles, if you're familiar with it, they start off nice black and hard, and then they shed their skin, then they're white and squishy and gooey, and over time they become hard and black again. I don't know why, I guess he got bigger. He was growing out of his shell. So, yeah. He did get bigger, didn't he? Yeah. These are John's slides. He sent me a few so that I can make sure I was talking about some of the examples coming out of Warner Babcock. So John thought about this process in close detail, and he realized that he could create a hair dye system out of this. Because it turns out some hair dyes that you find in salons are linked to bladder cancer, but also some of the ones that you can find on the shelf of still here in the US, which is absolutely amazing. You can see the active ingredient in there is lead acetate. So this is Grecian formula for men. And what it does is it actually gradually deposits lead deposits in your hair. Horrifying, isn't it? Yes, we cannot have it in white paint or put it in our cars anymore, but we can put it on our heads. It's absolutely amazing. But it's banned in Canada and Europe, but here in the U.S. you can still go buy it. Go figure. So this is so what happened is John was thinking about this little happy beetle, and came up with a similar kind of inspired by the beetle, this tyrosinase cascade. He actually can do the same sort of thing, but without lead, and so this is mimicking a natural process. So they've created this process, and what they did was he did this process. He got actually a mixture of hair. He got some hair samples. You can actually purchase hair samples if you're doing this research. Go figure. We learned a lot about hair, in this process. So he purchased some hair samples, and he did this process that's, again, based on this beetle. And what happened is they came out, it kind of was, it was all different colors. And so he called the vendor and he said, it's all different colors. I don't know what, and they said, well, actually, what we sold you or what we sell is actually mixtures of people's hairs. So it's not one color. Because usually what people who are developing new hair dyes are testing, to get one full color, and they're actually dyeing the hair. Well, this process is actually restoring your natural color. So what it does is it restores your natural color back. And so this is a patented process. And he's not only the president, but he's also the client right up here. So there's John. If you go on myhairprint.com, there's this great little video where they've got, these before and after images of him. He ends up being one of the grayest people in the company. So whenever they were testing a new formulation, they would try it out on him. So it was really funny. You never knew if he was going to have gray or brown hair when you saw him next. Right now it's gray. They've had the same formulation for a while. So Paul Hawken is now developing, and you can see some of the different ones. It's called Hairprint, and they're actually manufacturing it out here at Sausalito and selling it out of here on myhairprint.com. So it's a wonderful collaboration. And then another example that we've been working on for a long time, this actually goes back to some of my graduate research, is ultra low-cost, non-toxic solar. So solar energy devices are wonderful at the sort of end use, but they're really expensive to make, and they use quite toxic materials in the creation of them. These are silicon-based, and silicon, that element, you grow these huge wafers, and you can't really get around. You have to melt silicon at 1,500 degrees Celsius or above. It's a huge amount of energy in the processing of these panels. And then what do you do with them after the end of their lifetime as well? And so it also converts into a long energy buyback time for these devices. So we've been working quite a bit on, taking a look and what, let's increase our surface area. Let's make these things really low cost, low toxicity. We can get, the efficiency might not be, as much as those other panels that I showed you, but look at that surface area. It's beautiful. So, how can we create materials like this that mimic more like, some of these wonderful solar collectors that we have out there. This is titanium dioxide solar cells. These are inspired by, I would say inspired by some of those photosynthetic processes. But part of the trick of these too uses titanium dioxide, which is a whitening agent found in anything from toothpaste to white paint, and what this process for making that semiconductor layer still required about 500 degrees Celsius, so still some energy there. So what we did is we took a step back and we said, let's think about how, what else makes a nice film, makes a nice, hard substance that doesn't require that energy. And so it turns out that our bones and shells make nice, hard films, and I didn't have to spend time in a 500 degree oven to get my nice bone formation. So what is that process? Let's take a look and understand that process. So understanding that calcification process and how proteins chaperone and pull the pieces together, by doing that, we actually can now create this semiconductor at room temperature with essentially no energy. It's actually mechanical grinding that we use to do that. So what does that, now we're getting towards our our long off goal for these is, a paint that you can actually have harnessing, energy inside a room or outside. I mean, imagine, what we could do. But now, at least with the drastic, reduction in energy, we're able to, look at these, create these things on flexible substrates. We're even looking at, making these on paper, or we were making them on paper at one point. Another example, this is from a partnership that we have with Steelcase on the educational side of things. And I think Kate's going to touch upon this a little bit more, so I might not tell you too much about it. Kate's going, don't steal my thunder here. But it's a really interesting way to think about antibacterial agents. So it kind of flips that on its side and says, as opposed to putting things out into the environment that are going to kill bacteria, let's just figure out how to actually create surfaces that are bacteria static, that bacteria just won't grow on. So it's a different way of thinking about that. And I'm going to let Kate explain the rest of it. So it's all wonderful, hugely inspiring examples, and you can find so many of them in biomimicry, and I'm sure many of you probably have come across many wonderful examples as well. But how does biomimicry really relate to green chemistry? And this is how I like to think about it. Have you guys seen this picture? No? Oh, cool. Looks cool. So this guy is hanging from the ceiling from this device up here that's actually stuck to the ceiling using this gecko tape. And if you've heard about that, yeah, and it's super cool stuff, right? So it's this, you take a look at the little gecko feet. There's macro, meso, micro scale, and you get these little structures that actually, increase the surface area and actually adhere really nicely to substrate. So it's this wonderful, wonderful adhesive. There's another picture that's also, you may have seen, the Spider-Man hanging from the ceiling too. I don't know if you guys have seen that one. Those two images I've seen quite a bit. Wonderful, right? Amazing. Inspired by the gecko. But I ask, my question, as a chemist, as a scientist, is that's wonderful that it's inspired by that, but how is it made? What are the materials made of? And that's really where green chemistry comes into play. And that's really what green chemistry is all about, thinking about all of those materials and thinking about that the processing. So to think about this a little differently, what I call this my PowerPoint extravaganza slide because it's so exciting, and it took me a while to make this slide too. So, to explain this a little better, I say, well, where do products come from in the first place? You remember, I'm a chemist, I'm a molecular designer. So as molecular designers, what we can do as chemists, we take atoms and we arrange them in different geometries. Where's the ooh, ah? See, we need the ooh and ah. Yeah, and oh, wait, that one's a little fuzzy, sorry. This is a thymine molecule, by the way. But if as a molecular designer, we can make any molecule, any system that we can draw on a whiteboard, or that we can draw, as long as it doesn't violate some fundamental rules. But do we know how to make it in a benign way using safe reagents, creating no waste? That's the challenge. That's the challenge for us. But we're really good at making molecules, our society. We're very good at it. It's just a matter of, can we make them safely with reduced hazards and no waste? And we then take molecules and we assemble them in different geometries, and we put them together and we make all kinds of different materials that have different properties. We take these materials and we put them together and we make different components and devices. So we might have something that when I trigger it, it changes color. I know that was a pretty exciting change there. Or we have something that when we shine light on it, a reaction occurs. That's my photoresist right there for any of you scientists in the audience. Or if we have something that when we try to stick to it, it slides right off. That's my non-stick surface. I know, it's pretty high-tech slide here. It's just pretty cool. We then put these components, devices together, and we make different products, anything from cosmetics to electronics. And sometimes it's frightening how similar those two things can be, cosmetics and electronics. But and you can imagine how many go into, something like my iPhone, making something like my iPhone. So, So it's a process for developing our products and materials, and this is, applies to everything in our society. We us chemists, we think of everything as a chemical, and nothing is chemical free. Whenever we see chemical free, we sort of go, "What is that? A thought? What is it? If it's not a chemical." So anyway, so this is where sort of the process of product development, in a sense. But so after my PhD is in green chemistry. I received my PhD in green chemistry from UMass Boston, and I was the first one with that degree, actually. And after that, I did an industrial postdoc. I did it with Roman Haas Electronic Materials, now Dow Chemical, which I know might be, questionable for some people, but. It's really interesting to come into an industrial setting with a green chemistry mindset. So what happened is I was working in this research group, and I was designing waveguide materials for photoelectronics. What does that mean? So basically, I was designing the polymer, the material that goes on touchscreen computers. So that top layer. The touchscreen computers, and also the ancient PDA devices. Remember those Blackberries with those were the PDA devices. Those ones, not the iPhones. That uses glass on the surface. But so I was designing that top layer, and it's called a waveguide, which is essentially a fiber optic, which is the same thing as our landlines. So in our landlines, we communicate through photons. So it's actually light that you're communicating information, whereas in our electronics, we're communicating with electrons. So the touchscreen computers, what it is it's a grid of light with this material that I was developing. Grid in one direction and a grid in the other direction. And so when you press your finger on that grid, it sends a signal, and it knows where it interrupts that grid, and then it sends a signal, and that's where how it knows where you touched on the screen. So in our group meetings, we had extensive discussions about this design criteria. So you can imagine this material that we're creating, it has to have a certain performance criteria or design criteria. So it had to have a certain solubility because we were coating it onto a surface. It had to have a certain melting point and glass transition temperature, because you don't want it, as it gets warm, as it gets hot, you don't want it to warp or, melt or something like that. So it has to have thermal properties. It also had to have mechanical properties, so strength, modulus, because you're touching it day in and day out, so you don't want it to get brittle and break. Also had to have a certain refractive index, because we're bending light, right? So all of these technical design criteria, surface tension, you name it, we went on and on in these group meetings. And what wasn't in this discussion in these group meetings until I came in the room was, what about toxicity and environmental impact? So without these, right? Okay, I make a crappy polymer, a crappy product, and I, that does warp. And once it heats up and it starts warping and bending, I'd say, wow, that's pretty bad. I have to go and redesign it. I have to improve those properties. Well, can't we think of these two things as a property of the material and really consider that as part of our design criteria, so that if it does exhibit toxicity and environmental impact, we'd have to define that a little bit more for each product. But if it does exhibit these things, then we think of it in green chemistry, we think of it as a design flaw, and we go in and we redesign it out. So it's a performance criteria, it's a design criteria, and it needs to sort of be in those research meetings. And so what I'm talking about is really at this level. I'm jumping to chemistry education. But at that professional level, it's typically not in our language. It's not in those group meetings. It's not in our design criteria. So it's not in our language to be thinking in that way, that this is a performance criteria or a design flaw. So, but green chemistry is really the revolution that's trying to bring that into and saying, yes, it is part of our responsibility as designers, as chemists, as engineers, as materials scientists to bring that, and it's got to be part of our design. But if we're trying to change that up here in those group meetings, and we keep supplying from university students that don't have that training, that don't have that knowledge, And if we don't have change here, then, because we see chemistry education really as a continuum, and I probably should say science education more as a whole, science, technology, engineering, and math. But we see this continuum all along that they influence each other in both directions. So that's really where chemistry education comes in. And when we're not thinking about it in this way, when we don't have this in our language, we come up with all kinds of unintended consequences of the chemistry that we create and the products that we create. So to think about that a little bit differently, we have all kinds of hazardous things. I do very dangerous things every day, as you can imagine. So one of the dangerous things that I do is I try to cook, which is very dangerous. And I try to use these knives. You've seen the infomercials, right? The ones where the guy's like cutting through the pipe and then magically cuts through the tomato and it still cuts really nicely. I try to do the same sort of thing. So my stepdaughter is a culinary student, and no, she's no longer a student. Sorry, she's now a sous chef. So she's a master at all this, right? And she tells me I can't cut everything with a paring knife, and I say, really, I can't? So anyway, it's very dangerous behavior. I'm using a knife, cutting my food. And inevitably, I slip and it cuts me, and But I take that risk of doing this risky behavior because the function of the knife is to cut the food, and the hazard is it can cut me. So it's a very clear relationship with the function to the hazard. I can see it very, very clear what the hazard is and the function. Same thing if I try to cook some food, inevitably I'm going to burn the food or burn me, but I accept that risk because it's a very clear relationship from the function to the hazard. And there's all kinds of dangerous things that we do every day where you can clearly see the hazard, very clear hazards. But in chemistry, things are a little bit different. Do you remember the red dye scare? Yeah, so, and red dyes still do have some hazards with it. But so I can make a red dye, right? Again, I told you before, if we can draw the molecule on the board or on a piece of paper, we can make it. And I know how to make, a red dye. We have to have a certain amount of planarity to it. You have to have electron withdrawing group and electron donating group on each side. Anyway, we can make it, right? But if this red dye also happens to cause cancer, that's kind of an oops or an unintended consequence of something that we're making. I was intending to make a red dye. I didn't want one that caused cancer, it just so happened to. So the function to be red is dissociated from the hazard causing cancer. So it's completely dissociated. And there's all kinds of these things in chemistry. So it makes what we do as green chemists really hard. Just because something's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But this is our red dye to bisphenol A. I mean, it's a wonderful component in this wonderful shatterproof plastic that's now composed in our eyeglasses are made of polycarbonate plastic. It's this shatterproof material that's in our windshields in our cars. We also had it in baby bottles. We also had it in lots of other places. But it just so happens that when you look at the 3D structure of this, it overlays really nicely with estrogen, and it binds right into the estrogen sites in our bodies. And so that's going to have obvious negative implications. To phthalates in our plastics. They're put in there to make nice little squishy plastics, and softeners and that sort of thing. That's the function of it, but the hazard completely dissociated. To lead, it was a wonderful anti-knocking agent in gasoline and a nice stabilizer in white paint. Now we know a lot more about the unintended consequences of these, but that's how they were really, they were developed in these research meetings with that function in mind. And without having that sort of performance criteria of, let's make sure it doesn't impact, our kids and the environment and that sort of thing. Let's make sure it doesn't do that too. So we have all kinds of dissociated hazards and unintended consequences of the chemistry that we do. And what we typically do when we create and create hazards and use hazardous things, what we've traditionally done is worried about it after the fact. So we put on gloves to protect our hands, we put on masks to protect our lungs, goggles to protect our eyes, and scrubbers and filters and things to protect the environment, right? So all of these things are exposure precautions, and that's how we've traditionally dealt with hazards in hazardous chemicals in industry. And all of it focuses on that exposure side of the risk equation. So, but we know throughout history, exposure precautions can and will fail. We know that. And we've seen it time and time again. We still see it today in our communities. Unfortunately, we see exposure precautions, no matter how wonderfully engineered they are, they can and will fail. So if we can shift this to the hazard and actually remove the hazard or drastically take that down, then we don't have to worry about the exposure precautions. And so green chemistry, of course, I'm a chemist and material scientist, so I'm a little bit biased, but chemists and material scientists, they can have that greatest potential to actually impact pollution and hazards, and because we are we're dealing with the molecular building blocks of all of the products that we use and create. And if we can get it right, then we're in a lot better place further on down the line. So it's the only science where we're really focusing on that intrinsic hazard and removing that intrinsic hazard of the actual material. So green chemistry is about all of these things. I talked about all of these things, but it's also about these performance pieces, reducing costs, enhancing performance, and innovation, which really speak to companies and industry. But I think this is important, because it's going to be, and why green chemistry can be successful in the marketplace. Oftentimes we think when we're dealing with environment and sustainability that it's going to come at a cost, and that we're essentially at a crossroads with, the economics and environment. But that's not the case in green chemistry. And there's several reasons for this. I mean, part of it is no one wants to use a hazardous material if you don't have to. A lot of times we just don't have the solutions, so there might not be another choice at the moment. And companies might not have, the time to actually stop and invent. We wish they would do more of that. But so the cost of using hazardous materials, it costs more to store it, to transport it, treat it, dispose, regulatory costs, liability, worker health and safety, corporate reputation, community relations, new employee recruitment. More and more students today want to be working for companies that are contributing to the greater good. So students are demanding it, and they're demanding that from their employers and at their academic institutions as well. So it's expensive to use hazardous materials. So a company is going to shift to this if they can. And that's the key, if they can. Another cost of doing business has to do with environmental regulations. These are some of John's slides as well, too. You can usually tell if you got the little Warner Babcock logo in the corner. But what John did was he tallied up the number of laws we have here in the U.S. over the past about 140 years or so. And what you see, and these are environmental regulations here in the U.S., not much happened until about 1962. It's also the year John was born. So, but Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, never doubt that one person can't change the world. And goes exponentially up from this point. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you take a look at these, there's all these little acronyms that say, no, you can't dump that in the rivers anymore. We want rivers that don't light on fire. Go figure. Because that did happen, and it's it's important for us to remember that did happen. And we're very fortunate, and there's more and more, happening because we still do. Our pollution looks a little bit different. I feel like it's a little bit more hidden these days, in endocrine disruptors and some of these other things that are coming out. But at least we've got a system here that's pretty good for environmental regulations to protect us in our environments. But when a company looks at this too, they also see this is an exponential increase in the cost of doing business. So, so if they can avoid some of these things and using some of these things that require regulations, they're going to do it. They're going to shift away from it. But unfortunately, companies still spend just as much on research and development as they do on complying to these environmental regulations. So we want to see them shift a little bit more into that research and development space and pull back on the environmental regulations because they can avoid them. So green chemistry, an important piece to green chemistry, if you've heard John speak before, he always tries to hammer this home too. Of course, an alternative green chemistry technology has to have an environmental benefit. It has to be more environmentally benign, or just as, it has to have that environmental, benefit to it than an alternative. But it also has to perform. So, like that, you remember that green cleaner, one of the first ones that came out that you had to, you were washing your windows and it left the streaks, and then you had to go get something else to clean it off. The performance wasn't quite there. You weren't going to go back and buy that cleaner just because it had an environmental benefit, or maybe you would. I don't know. I don't want to make judgments for you, but it has to have. I guess the average consumer might not go back and get it. It has to have that performance. It has to perform just as good or better than the alternatives. Otherwise, we're not going to go back and get it. It also has to have the economics. So very rarely will we pay a premium for these. Sometimes we will if we can afford it. But we really need the economics to be there. And all these three things together is really what green chemistry is all about. Again, it makes what we do really hard, not easy, but it makes what we do a challenge. So green chemistry, here's the definition that was published in John's book back in '98. It's the design of, and focus on the word design, it's all about innovation and design, chemical products and processes that reduce or eliminate the use or generation of hazardous substances. There it is in one sentence. But this book was published in '98, and one of the best pages in it, and don't tell John that I told you only one page I like, but it's not true. It's a great book. It's the whole thing is good. But this is the most important thing that's in it, are these 12 principles. And this is what speaks to us as chemists, as molecular designers. How can we actually change the chemistry that we do? What should we consider as we're greening up our processes? And it's things like, overarching principles such as pollution prevention. It's better to prevent waste than it is to treat it or clean it up after the fact. Some of them are no-brainers like that. Just like this one's kind of I think the oh yeah or duh one. Yeah, we don't want to use things that cause explosions or fires. Wouldn't that be obvious, don't you think? But we needed to state it in chemistry. So you'll see what the challenge that we face as green chemists, that yes, this needs to be stated in chemistry. But it's also things, such as less hazardous using safer reagents, safer solvents, using renewable feedstocks, so shifting away from petroleum-based, which 90-95% of what we create today are still petroleum-based. To things designing for degradation, because there are fundamental design rules for what makes a molecule break down and what makes something persist. So we can understand that as chemists. So anyway, these are the 12 principles. I'm not going to go into all of them in detail, but you can kind of get a flavor if you haven't heard more about green chemistry. The good news is that it's growing. So this is a map from University of Oregon's Greener Educational Materials for Chemists. It's a wonderful database online of the University of Oregon, and you can go in and search terms and find some wonderful resources in there. Most of the resources that you find in there are going to be for higher ed community, so it's mostly for undergraduate level. But there's a great amount of resources out there. And you can also, if you're a green chemist or looking to get into the space, you can put in yourself on the map. And you can go see who's in your area through this Google map. And it's not only US-based. You can also, although I just took a snapshot of the US, it's also international when you go on the site. So you can see the community of green chemists is growing and growing and growing. You have to put yourself on this map too. So I'm sure there's many, many more that they just haven't gone through the steps to put themselves on the map yet too. So that's good. It's positive. It's growing. This community is growing. There's a lot of work happening. If you went back to back when I started in green chemistry in '99, this would have been pretty. You wouldn't have seen many of these little spots. There was a few, but it's hugely increased just over the past 15 years. This is the This is a slide from Green Chemistry Commitment is a higher ed program that we run, and colleges and universities are signing on and committing to teaching green chemistry at their college and their university. One of our latest signers was UC Davis. We're also super excited to have UC Berkeley on board. So out in this area, we have some very progressive and also really large institutions that are top ranked, which is super valuable for the community to see that these institutions are creating change and are actually bringing green chemistry right into their chemistry degree programs. So it's really exciting. So the Green Chemistry Commitment is really, these institutions are signing on, and they're committing to implementing student learning objectives. And so, because what we're about is really trying to change, to create systemic change so that we can support, the change that needs to happen in industry. And each one of these institutions does things a little bit differently. So it's really exciting to see how each institution is implementing it. And these aren't the only institutions that are doing green chemistry. These are just the Green Chemistry Commitment ones. More and more and more are signing on. This is a fairly new program of ours. So the good news, too, is there's a lot of research happening. There's some wonderful Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award winners out there, which is an award that comes out of the US EPA. There's wonderful case studies in green chemistry. I'm going to point to just a few more before I hand things over to Kate in just like 3 slides or so. Just a few slides. But just a few more coming out of the Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry. This is a company called Collaborative Aggregates, and it has to do with asphalt paving. Asphalt is all petroleum. It's all petroleum that we've got, on our roads, and it's remarkable how much we have covering our earth. So what John did, and this is also a good biomimetic example as well, too, because I'm going to actually pull this up, I think. Yeah, so they have this material that they call delta S. Any scientist in the room, delta S? What is the S? Oh, you're almost. Entropy. So it's entropy. It's we're nerds, okay? We're nerds. Yes. Yeah, it is. It is nerdy. Yeah. So it's But so much, if you ever hear John talk about entropy, I mean, in nature, what happens is, nature is so driven by entropy. And in chemistry, it's very much driven by enthalpy. So we are gonna, it's the heat, beat, and treat kind of, thing that we do as chemists. Like, we can make and break bonds, and we're gonna use as much energy and enough, a bunch of nasty materials too to make this happen. But John always flips this on its side and said, let's look at the entropy. Let's look at the how things self-assemble. And if you've heard him use this term too, let's sit these molecules down on a chair and say, what do you want to do? So it's called molecular psychology and understanding what a molecule wants to do. And we're going to be in a much better place energy-wise and in terms of sustainability too. So this is called delta S, because of the entropy. So what he's got this, magic frou-frou dust kind of a thing that when you add it to, so what happens when you're repaving a road, they chop it all up and essentially stick it in a landfill. And they might be able to use 5% or so of that material to recycle it back in and turn it into new road. But oftentimes it's so oxidized from the sun that you can't reuse the materials. So it's just so damaged. But his magic frou-frou dust, I'm sure he does not call it that, but I am right now. He can use over 50% recycled material. And the other thing that his magic ingredients do is that they can also pave at really cold temperatures. So this is our house right there. If you come to our house in Wilmington, Mass., that's what it looks like. And this was our driveway. You can't really see too well. So we actually had our driveway was fine. But John wanted to test out a new formulation. So, and a new asphalt. So, of course, what happens? It's tested on us. Just like the hair dye, it's tested on It's tested on John. So they ripped up our driveway, which was a perfectly good driveway, and then they put down this new thing, and they paved it. Actually, it was a couple of years ago now, and it was just before Thanksgiving, and it was so cold. It was like 17 degrees, for us in New England, super cold for that time of year, and the thing is, you can't typically pave at that temperature. You need you need a much warmer temperatures. So, but it went down just fine. I think the construction people that were at our house were thinking, a big hockey puck was going to come out and just sort of, sit there. But they paved it. It worked. We have a nice driveway now, which we did before, but this one's even better. And it's holding the test of time. But they're also working with a number of places, because the goal is that they could take, so what they want to get to with this product, because right now they can use 50% material. Okay, so we're getting better. That still means 50% of it's going into a landfill, right? We're in a better place. But what they want to get to is essentially have like a machine that sort of takes, strips up the current asphalt, reworks it, and lays it right back down. Right, so that's where they want to get to. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. So wouldn't that be cool? No more petroleum that we need to cover our streets and our roads and our highways. That's them at some show. Okay, and then they're also working on formaldehyde-free wood composites. So this is another one that they just went up to Canada just a couple weeks ago and did a new production. You remember the FEMA trailers where people were getting sick from all the formaldehyde off-gassing and things because of, this plywood is a wonderful, wonderful case study of green chemistry. We're shifting away from formaldehyde and phenolic resins and things like that. And this is lignocellulose composite material, so that is actually outperforming many of the current particle board and plywood materials that are out there. So building and construction materials, and this is out of a spin-off company out of Warner Babcock called Collaborative Aggregates. So another issue that they're working on is ocean plastics, and so there's a huge issue of ocean plastics, which you might be familiar with. They're building up in our oceans at incredible rates, and it's just hugely devastating to see what's actually happening. Back in the summer, John got to go to the United Nations and present about this problem. There he is up on stage. But there's this wonderful organization called Parley for the Oceans. They're out of New York City, and they've teamed up with Warner Babcock as well. And have you seen the show Whale Wars? I don't know. I haven't really watched it, but it's I'm familiar with it. But they go around, and anyway, the Sea Shepherd. There it is, the Sea Shepherd. They picked up and they found they got a fishing net from one of the there's these fishing nets that are just sort of abandoned out there, and then the wildlife gets stuck in, the animals get stuck in the water. Well, they harvested one, and then they sent it. There they are with the fish, the huge amounts of fishing net. They sent it to Warner Babcock, who spun it into a nylon fiber, and they sent it to Adidas, and they made a shoe out of it. It's super cool. And this was just over the summer. They had a nice press release and thing about that. And this is a prototype shoe that they're going to be selling next year, Adidas. So this is addressing the issue of the current problems of, what's out there. The next phase of this is creating plastic, that's not going to build up our environment. Part of it's an infrastructure problem. Part of it's a just plastic use problem. And part of it is having, actual materials that might break down in the proper timeline or be, break down into nice, innocuous byproducts. So that's the... How do they collect? That's a great question. They have lots of people that are collecting it. They have some fishing boats that collect it. They also have people that are going along beaches and collecting it off the shores. So it's like a huge, it's an intensive process because it takes a lot of people to do that. So, yeah.
But was the shoe made from the nets or the plastic?
The fiber, it was actually a nylon fiber spun from the plastic. So they basically melted the net. Yeah, and then spun a new fiber from it. Yeah. So part of the challenge with the ocean plastics, though, is it's made of, I mean, the fiber is different because the net is like one material. But when they're harvesting all of this, it's multiple plastics. It's got lots of different properties. So they're trying to figure out what more they can do with some of these ocean plastics. They're turning them into some building materials, building and constructing materials. They're actually turning some of them into paint, which is really interesting. So, yeah, it's a big issue. Another one, and I think this might be my last example, is, so I already mentioned BPA. You remember BPA in water bottles and baby bottles, and it was remarkable. Canada banned it, and then all of a sudden, I feel like they were just gone. They just got out of all of the plastic bottles. So John was talking to a reporter at one point and, saying, well, isn't this wonderful? And he said, yeah, it is. But what I'm more concerned about is, there's the amount of BPA that's actually leached out of these is so minimal, although it's an endocrine disruptor, so you don't need much of it to have an impact. But what happened, realistically, what I'm concerned about is cash register receipts. You also find BPA in can linings, in epoxy resins, but you find it in powder form, free powder form on thermal cash register receipts. So you have milligram quantities on these things. And it's kind of, and it sort of hit us. I remember we were sitting in a restaurant, and I think we were in San Francisco, and I was facing, the fire brick oven thing that they had for the pizzas, and they had the stack of receipts, on the thing right there. And I watched, John was facing me, and so I could see this happening. And the guy takes the stack, and then he's like, I'm just going to throw them in the fire. He throws them in the fire. So I'm going, oh my goodness, how many people, are getting exposed to this in their food? Anyway, it was pretty remarkable. So John's talking with a reporter about this, and then it's all over the news, BPAs and cash register receipts. It's all over the place. John was even in this esteemed journal, Women's World, with on the same page as a cat pushing a shopping carriage. We still have it. We're going to frame this, I think. John Warner discovers that there's, or reveals that there's, even though it wasn't really a secret, he just said it to somebody, that BPA is in cash register receipts. So they've been doing a lot of work on, BPA-free thermal image, thermal printing. So it's really interesting stuff that they've got coming out of the Warner Babcock Institute. So that's my part. I'm handing it over to Kate to talk to you guys a little bit more about biomimicry and green chemistry and how this fits into education. I don't know if you want to pause for a second if there's any burning questions at this point, too. We can also address questions at the end, too.
Question? Stretching? Question and stretch?
In regards to BPA, is there other stuff, like I've heard there's BPS and still other types of plastics that are in there, so this whole BPA thing was just like, get everybody's focus on that and make us think that plastics are okay now.
Yeah, and repeat that.
Yeah, so the question is, are companies now going to shift towards something like BPS, which is really just a sulfonated version of bisphenol A? That is an excellent point, and this is a point that we talk about a lot, that, the way that we address these things in our federal government is to focus chemical by chemical by chemical. And that's not really a good way to do it, right? Because there's always another one's going to pop up, or they're going to say, okay, let's add a carbon, and now it's not that chemical. But it's so similar that it might have the actual same properties. So what we've been, or worse, exactly. And what we've been advocating for is more of a comprehensive chemicals policy, so that it's you're looking at assays, you're looking at the actual, how do these molecules behave? What are the hazards? What are those hazard endpoints, as opposed to molecule by molecule? Then you're going to get away from the lists, and okay, I can use any chemical as long as it's not on this list. But now we're going to say, okay, no, we want things that don't cause cancer. We want things that, don't have endocrine disruption, and define those a little bit tighter too for companies. So that's what we've been advocating for, because you're absolutely right, that happens a lot. So, yeah.
So that sort of velvety feel to cash register receipts is BPA?
The velvety feel cash register receipts is BPA. Yes and no. 50%, it turns out that 50% of cash register receipts are BPA, use BPA, and 50% don't. So actually 50%, you can't tell as a consumer. And that's the thing, like it's a little bit horrifying. And most companies don't even know, like, Whole Foods, they might not know, wherever you're shopping, like the people who are buying their cash registers for their cash registers, they might not know either. So you can buy some right now that aren't, some of them might not work as well as the BPA ones, but maybe we don't even need cash register receipts. We're moving away from that anyway, and maybe you don't. So anyway, yeah. So you can't really tell. Yeah.
I want to go back a little ways. You had that. I'd like the title of the book too, with the 12 principles of green chemistry design.
Green chemistry theory and practice.
So I have a question about that, and I just want to use a parallel in medicine. How there used to be a whole lot of different things that were done that would lead to. They just accepted that there would be mistakes and there would be what amounted to malpractice. That it's just an acceptable amount of
Yeah.
life loss or whatever.
Yep.
And then finally, some people got together and said, let's get this protocol list together, and they implemented it, and they were able to save a lot of lives and a lot of money and a lot of heartache and stuff. And so they started to spread that around.
Yep.
As far as they could, like into NICUs or whatever, and it just changed everything. And it was like a change in consciousness, and people just started becoming more aware and present with what
Yeah.
they're doing. And I'm just wondering, can you think of anything at the federal level that would help to bring something like that to your 12 principles? Could you do that in a way that would be like sort of a blanket regulatory policy or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. The thing about the good thing about green chemistry is that it's not regulation, and that it's what companies turn to avoid regulation, or it's because of regulation they're going to go to green chemistry. So we try to, because we want to be company and industry friendly, because we want them to do green chemistry, right? And so we try to avoid we let the regulators do, the chemical policy people do what they're going to do. We want them to, make sure they're creating good, strong regulations. But we want to be on the other end waiting for people to, come to us for or come to green chemistry to help solve those regulatory issues. So it's a tricky one. I don't know from a regulatory perspective. I don't know if you could regulate people actually doing green chemistry, because us chemists are really odd, and we've got these strange egos, and we've got, sometimes they're can barely fit in a room, with these, and so they're really the way, we don't want to turn them off to it. So I don't know, that's a tricky question. I don't know if you had any other nuggets for that one. So that's interesting. But the green chemistry commitment is focused on the academic level, and that's a non-regulatory approach. It's kind of fashioned after the President's climate commitment, which is a non-regulatory approach as well. And it's a voluntary, the colleges and universities are signing on and committing to bringing their campuses down to climate neutral, because they see the benefits. They're not going to wait for regulations. They're going to do it. And so that's kind of what the green chemistry commitment is fashioned on. It's a non-regulatory approach because it's the right thing to do. It's where we're going to get to, hopefully. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Just one sort of corollary to that is, what would you say, you talked about the egos of chemists and stuff, what could you say is the difference between, was there something in your education, or was there something in you psychologically that led you to question all of this and to say, I don't find this acceptable?
Well, I didn't think I was going to be a chemist. So that was I guess, so I was into environmental science. And in 8th grade, I did a Earth Day fair and learned about ozone depletion, and I was just alarmed. I was like, why isn't everyone else alarmed? And then I learned about all the other issues and challenges, and I just couldn't believe that people weren't more alarmed and doing something. And so I said, I'm going to do something. And then when I went to college, undergrad, where I went, they didn't have environmental science major. I would have gone into that. And it's funny that I chose that, but it was actually my choice of undergrad institutions was based on athletics. more than academics. I'll admit that now. But it worked out wonderfully because had I gone somewhere else that had an environmental science major, I would have been, studying the problems, which is valuable and important, but I wouldn't have been focused on the problem solving, which is green chemistry. And so anyway, they didn't have that major, so there was chemistry or biology, and I said, well, I like chemistry more than biology, so I'm going to do that. And I thought I was going to be, environmental chemist, and I thought I was going to be doing that sort of thing. But then I learned about green chemistry, and I got, oh my goodness, I can create solutions, and I can use chemistry as the solution as opposed to chemistry as the problem. And that was hugely powerful for me once I realized that, because I saw that as being, to me, a really powerful place to be. So, yeah. Sorry, I don't want to. Do you want to get?
I got it really quick.
Yeah, okay, go for it.
What is your driveway made of?
It's still petroleum. Right now it's but it's also petroleum and usually ground up like roofing material, which is also petroleum. But it's 50%. It's over 50% recycled petroleum. So at least we're not harvesting more of it. So yeah. I don't know. Good question. I'll ask John that one. Yeah.
It would reflect the sun back up on all the roads.
Oh yeah, I know. We're do you want to do a little bit more? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
This would be a good segue question, but are there websites or particular places where people, more and more lay people, could become informed about all the things out there, good and bad, as far as chemical products go?
There's some great, yeah. Yep, Environmental Working Group is a great one. There's also some, like skin deep websites that, focus more on cosmetics. There's Beauty Counter. There's Good Guide. Good Guide is they even have an app. There's some really.
Those are all from Environmental Working Group.
Well, there you go.
Just go to EWG, and they have
EWG, Environmental Working Group. Yep, awesome. Yeah.
Any update from last year when John was talking about Alzheimer's?
Yeah, that's still in trials. It's now in human trials for toxicity. This is an Alzheimer's disease drug, and that's a long process. But they're advancing, and it's still blowing everything else out of the water, which is exciting. Yeah.
Second question: are you doing any research, or who determines what's toxic now versus what might be toxic in the future? Are you doing any research in that regard? So there's a lot of natural substances that happen to be toxic too.
Yeah, the good question. We're not approaching it exactly that way, but what we're doing is creating toxicology modules and curriculum to train chemists to think this way and to bring this into their design portfolio so that we can avoid so many more of those unintended consequences than we ever could before. So that's the way we've been approaching it, is by giving those tools to chemists, to the molecular designers, so they can actually know how to properly or to design in reduced toxicity and design in biodegradability and design in these pieces. So that's how we've been focusing on it. So, yeah.
Is there a green chemistry approach to solving issues like HPLC? I've seen a lot of classic HPLC would use methanol and lots of little vials, and then green chemistry.
You're a chemist, aren't you? Yeah. Yes, there's some short, I'm not going to remember the names of them right now, but there are some analytical methods that are coming out that drastically cut down on the amount of solvent use, because analytical chemistry, and which is used quite a bit in environmental chemistry, is a big impact, obviously, in all the solvent use. So yes, absolutely. And there's some, there's a few that we have at the Institute that they've been trying out, I'm not going to remember the names of what they're called, but I'd be happy to give you, to see if I can find more information for you on that. So there's also a lot of work going on in analytical chemistry to address the analytical side of things. So absolutely. Yeah. Yes. One more.
I just want to address two of the questions that were raised about BPA and print receipts. There was a movement in around 2011 by shareholder activists led by an Oakland group called As You Sow, which approached many companies and banks. So there's actually a lot of BPAs out of the print receipts.
Good to know.
The problem with that and with the plastic is they moved into BPS, which is not necessarily
Thank you. Yep, one more. I don't know if all of the studies have been done, but I would think that it's probably going to be fairly similar. But just looking at structures. But I don't. It's one of those things like. It's one of these weird things that we have, chemicals are innocent until you can really prove them guilty. It's like, it's just really, or they're, I don't know. It's really, really hard to because there's so many assays and so many tests to run. So, good. Yeah. So if we can just move straight away from that bisphenol structure, I think we'd be in a lot better space. So, okay, I'm going to hand it over to Kate to talk more about the education materials we have.
Fabulous. Thanks, Amy. Loving the dialogue. This is what we like. We like questions and we like answers. We like to, do our best. And when we're asking really good questions and we don't have the answers, that's good. All right? That's good education. That means we've got engaged students, and that's what we want to see. So my background, I'll just really quickly, tell you a little about myself. I'm not a chemist. Don't tell anybody. No, my background, so I love that you asked the question of, where Amy got her passion from. And for me, I went to undergrad. I went to UMass Boston. Guess what? They were teaching green chemistry there to the PhD chemists and also the non-science majors, me, which is kind of wild. The undergrad chemistry majors weren't learning about green chemistry at this time in 2000, shockingly enough. But my background, political science and environmental studies, because for me, I thought the only way that I can make environmental change is through advocacy or through environmental regulation or environmental law. So those were all the directions that I was heading in. And then I turned out that wasn't the direction I wanted to go in at all. And education for me is what lit me up. And so I went on and got a master's in environmental education, and then paths sort of brought me to green chemistry again after I'd been out of undergrad for a little while. And I got so excited because it is such an essential piece of environmental education. It's a building block. Let's look at it from the very, very beginning design phase. And how do we use this as a tool to learn and communicate and do better science? Because that's really what it's all about. And when I'm working with students, I know I just love to build off of their energy, because guess what? Kids get it. There's no hesitation whatsoever when you start talking about, you say green and chemistry, and we break down the words. Chemistry is scary. Chemistry is raise your hands here if you are a chemist in the audience. Be brave enough to go ahead and raise your hand. Yeah. Oh, we've got a chemist in training too. Okay. So when you hear the word chemistry, what are some of those things? Come on, share with everybody. What are some of the things? Explosions. We think explosions. What else do you think of when you think of chemistry? You think of toxic. You think of these chemicals, right? And again, there's nothing is chemical free, but there's plenty of marketing out there for chemical free, all sorts of things. You can buy all sorts of chemical free things. They're imaginary, right? But yeah. So chemistry's got a bit of a bad rap, right? And part of what we need to be doing in our communications, in our early communications, is it's the science of solutions. Nobody ever told me that when I was younger. No one ever told me that chemistry was the science of solutions. I had no idea that that was the case. I had to learn it. Who's going to teach it, right? It's going to be everybody here, because we're all part of this big green chemistry ambassador program now, whether you're a chemist or not. You've signed on just by coming today. So a little bit about the work that we do. We do have resources, obviously focused in green chemistry land, but we are STEM, right? We cross all of that. We cross all the disciplines. And we've got some really great resources for both middle school and high school level. These are all online and free. So please go to our website, get our resources. They're in Word document intentionally so that you can take it and make it work for you. There's, at the middle school level, we you can actually make shampoo. How fun is that? You are put in the role of a material scientist or a chemist, and you pick what's going to go into your shampoo, and you learn a little bit about cosmetics in your everyday lives, because that connects. That helps bring it to life. At least I know it does for me, and I know it does for the students, because they remember then a little bit about acids and bases, and they remember a little bit more about exothermic reactions, because it's not some abstract thing that doesn't really mean anything to them. They connect it back to reality. It goes, oh, right, chemists aren't just mad scientists back in the lab mixing up chemicals for the heck of it. That's not what it's all about. Chemists are designing things that are helping to improve our lives. That's another message that I would say, certainly from my political background, not something I believed at all. I really didn't. There were these companies out there who are there just making money. They weren't there to be out there designing things for the benefit of humanity. They're trying to make a quick buck. Guess what? That's not entirely true either, right? We need to question these things. We need to question them, and we need to be creating that dialogue, right? So that's a lot of what our resources do. They're engaging their inquiry style, trying to figure out, okay, how can we do this stuff? So we've got biotech, green math and engineering, and green chemistry. So Amy, at the very beginning, showed, I didn't fix that. So at the beginning, she showed our mission and vision, and this really is the heart of the organization. We work with both students, teachers, professors, all levels, and to watch and see students sort of get it and have those aha moments and get really excited that there is this other way to be creating solutions and to be making positive environmental impacts is hugely powerful, right? And that's something that we all can do. And it doesn't have to come in the formal setting. It can certainly come in informal education, which is what we're here today doing, right? So has anybody gone to the family fair? Raise your hand. Okay, a few people. For all those people who haven't gone to the family fair, please go to the family fair. There is really fun stuff happening over there. And great volunteers that are doing some really cool activities, some of which I will talk about. So I will just bounce back that it doesn't have to be in the formal setting. Informal education is incredibly powerful, and I do believe that makes, it has a huge influence. We know, there are studies that show us that students will not go into the STEM fields if they're not excited about it before the 8th grade. There are lots of research out there, and a lot of times it tracks back to an informal experience that they've had that's gotten them excited to go into the STEM fields. So we all have the power to make that change. On the formal side, though, there's this big push. Who's familiar with the term next generation science standards? Okay, yes. And who here, how about educators? Are you formal or informal educators? Raise your hand. Okay, fabulous. And now I need to see the game changers. Who are the game changers in here? All right, game changers, good. What about change makers? I want to see what. Everybody is a change maker. You're at the Bioneers conference. I want to see everybody's hands. You're all change makers, right? So yay, there we go. Thanks. So the next generation science standards, this is something where green chemistry fits so well into the equation because we're no longer, we're really looking at creating solutions, analyzing problems, creating solutions. That's what green chemistry is all about. That's what biomimicry is all about. So using those tools, it fits in seamlessly. We do have, for the high school level, we've got this resource called Curriculum Map. And what this does is it actually spells out all the places that you can integrate chemistry, green chemistry across the chemistry curriculum throughout the year. And we do offer online courses. We've got several teachers who have taken courses out here. And that's one of the wonderful things about doing an online course, right? Is you get to interact with people from all over the world. We had teachers this summer from Australia, from Ireland. We had a teacher from, I want to say Bolivia. Like we've had some really, really diverse audiences in our online course, which is fabulous. And it always especially when we have that international audience, gives us, pause to think of all the different ways that we can be integrating into education systems. So this is just one thing that I wanted to highlight and just let you know about. So I don't really like just talking and talking and talking. So we're going to play a game, because what's more fun than that, right? So this is one of the ways that we introduce green chemistry. We use biomimicry. Now you guys are pros on this one, so you might really just blow me out of the water. Some of these examples you're going to be intimately familiar with, but this is one of our resources that we have online, and it's one of the ways we can start the conversation and using biomimicry as our starting place, right? So you get these set of cards, and if we were in tables, I'd give you cards, and we do it in teams, and that's how we would do it. But we don't have that set up in here, so we're going to do it another way. We're going to go like this. We're going to start with this image. What the heck is that? A submarine. Okay, so submarines. When you're thinking about designing a submarine, whales. We can look to whales for inspiration. What is another animal that we could? Dolphin would be another animal. Excellent. Who else? Squid, seals, birds, shark, otters. There's so many animals that we could derive inspiration from. One of the fastest. We're going to go with shark, all right? And shark has actually, so there are faster submarines as a result of innovation in looking at sharks. So we also have the sharklet example, which I've got a little bit more information on that one too. But there's some really cool stuff we've been learning from sharks and be able to integrate it into our technology. How about this one? Termites. So termite mounds in particular, right? So termite mounds, what do we know about termite mounds? How tall can they get in Australia? Give me a guess. 6 feet. Yeah, they can get up to 6 feet tall. They're pretty amazing. Termites are amazing engineers, aren't they? They're just phenomenal. So what if we could learn from them how to make buildings that didn't rely on air conditioning? What about that? Have you guys heard that one before? Yeah? Oh, you know it. Jeez. Okay. I'm going to try to get you. I'm going to try to stump you on one of them. Okay. All right, so the next one. The blue morpho butterfly. Oh, ooh, you know it. Go.
More vibrant colors in technology using less batteries.
No. Hey, biomimicry, all right? What biomimicry is so cool is that it's ideas, all right? So just because my answer up here is not exactly what your answer is doesn't mean that that's wrong, okay? Structural color. Excellent, I heard it. Structural color, yeah. So Amy, wave your ring around. Amy has a really cool ring that has, come on, show it off. This is actually her wedding ring.
It's our wedding ring.
And it's structural color.
Yeah, well, it's titanium dioxide. It's titanium, and then it's anodized, so they pass a current through it, and they essentially oxidize the surface of the titanium. And depending on the amount of charge, the current you pass through it, you get a different particle size. We are nerds. Okay, I'm telling you, we're nerds. This is our, but based on the particle size, it deflects the light or reflects the light, and you get a different color. So you can get pretty much any color from the rainbow. So ours is blue in the groove here, but it's titanium dioxide. So it's not a pigment. It's not going to scratch off. It's just the surface is titanium. So it's a titanium ring, titanium dioxide surface. And of course, my research was in titanium dioxide too, so some of it anyway. So again, we are such nerds. I am such nerds. And I'm wearing a tripeptide necklace here, which I'll tell you about.
And metal layers, yes. So yeah, if we think about the manufacturing of pigments and dyes, we could use a little help in that department, all right? There's certainly, and there is work being done. But if we could rethink and go in the structural color direction, there is a company called Taisian Fabrics in Japan that is doing these really cool things. So I know some of you are nodding your heads, and I know some of you are definitely familiar with this one. Yeah.
What's it called?
Taisian Fabrics is the name. Teijin. J-I-N. Yes, it's a J, yeah. Tajin, yeah. So they're a pretty cool one. Now, all right, what is this a picture of? You know this one? Okay. We do have a problem, right? We've got landfills, and we've got lots of them. And anybody know what one of the gases is that comes from them? Yes, so methane. Methane helping to contribute to global climate change, right? We've got excess, all sorts of things. So, right, we're all really well-versed in the problems, right? We're well-versed in the problems here. What can we possibly be doing? Who could we possibly derive inspiration from to help us address reducing the amount of methane that's coming out of landfills? I've stumped you, haven't I? Uh-oh, bacteria. Bacteria, you are on it. So it is bacteria. Oh, okay, so I was not going in the mushroom direction, but bacteria. So there's another animal, the kangaroo. So how the bacteria inside the kangaroo's stomach actually digests grass differently than cows. So cows, same diet, eating grass, produce methane, right? But the kangaroos, research scientists, right up until like a couple of years, not even, I think it's only been a year and a half, they thought that kangaroos didn't actually produce any methane at all. Truth is they do, it's just much less than cows. And it has to do with that enzyme, bacteria, that they're, inside their stomachs. So what if, right, what if we could derive and figure out some way to use enzymatic, use bacteria, use something to be breaking down and digesting our landfills in a way that would reduce the methane? That'd be pretty darn great, wouldn't it? It would be fabulous.
But would it be better to capture the methane?
That is one, right? I think there is no one right answer, right? So I think we've got so many challenges when it comes to looking at some of our problems that if we don't come up with multiple solutions and ways to address it, we're not going to solve it, right? We're going to make incremental progress, which is hugely important, right? And we want to keep taking those next steps and next steps. So some of these are ideas that are going to take a chunk out of it, just like the asphalt, right? 50% is a heck of a lot better than 0, but it's still not 100. And the goal is we want to get to that point. So progress. And there's so many different ways that I think we need to be working on these solutions, for sure. So here's one more, the blue mussels. Who's familiar with this example? This is another real classic, okay? Yeah, for you well-versed biomimicry folks in the room, you biomimetics. Yeah, now it's looking good. So the BISIS thread that enables the blue mussels to adhere to rocks and to boats and to, whatever they want to, the proteins from that, they were able to analyze. So these scientists, Professor Lee from Oregon State, was able to figure out how to replicate, and sort of mimic the same way that those proteins do the adhering and use that in the making of plywood. So the formaldehyde-free plywood. Now, it was interesting that we had the question before about policy in terms of change, and there's this whole set of Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award, this whole challenge, it goes out every year, and there are 5 awards that have been giving out since 1997, is that right? 96, I was close. So this continuity over the years, you think we've had Democrats and we've had Republicans in the office since then, and this award has stayed steady. So this is one way of recognizing and celebrating some of the work that's happening in industry about green chemistry, innovation, and technology. And so there's big companies, there's big names, and then there's academics that you've never heard of before that are doing this work. So this is just one classic example that often gets talked about when we're talking about biomimicry. Now, we were able to spin off 2 different lessons for this one. The middle school, which could also be elementary school level as well. We do it when we do outreach. So what the students do is they compare and make 2 homemade glues, And when we boil down the 12 principles, we talk about cost, safety, performance. So the triangle, you need to have cost, safety, performance in order for it to be green chemistry technology. So they compared two different glues, homemade glues, one of which uses a little more energy, one of which maybe doesn't stick quite as well. But guess what? You have to evaluate and use your criteria to determine which one, if you're going to market and you're going to be a glue manufacturer, which one are you going to pick and why? So it helps them to sort of process and think, because with everything we're making choices. Thank you. We're making choices and deciding, there are consequences to our choices. And so having that understanding that for everything, there are some trade-offs, and there's lots of green chemistry metrics for at the academic level and for the professional level, but even for students, just the basics of them understanding that there are trade-offs is really important, because we don't want to sugarcoat that this particular product has no consequences, right? Everything's got something. So now I've been blabbering a little bit too much, so I'm going to have to speed through my next few things, but I have two particular ones to highlight from this Steelcase partnership. So one of the things that for us as a nonprofit, one of the ways that we are able to offer free resources online is we partner with companies that want to, help support the work that we do, and that enables us to make our resources free and open source. So Steelcase sponsored the development of 3 case studies highlighting some of the innovations that they're really proud of, that they're doing in partnership with their company partners. And so one of them is Ecovative. Have you guys heard of these guys? Raise your hands. I heard somebody. Okay, so Ecovative is a company in New York, and what they're doing is, I just love the question, are mushrooms the new plastic? I mean, that gets you kind of excited, right? You really want to know the answer to that. Are they? Are they? So what this process is what they're taking is they've developed a way that there's a particular, and this is a very particular thing, so it's a particular mushroom, it's a particular fungus, and it's the roots, so it's the mycelium of the roots that they are able to infuse and use agricultural waste. So if you think of, corn husks, anything sort of left over in the farm, they're able to use that, and it's a replacement for styrofoam. So think of styrofoam and how unhappy of a product that is. But wait, at the same time, styro has all these amazing properties, right? It does these really, really great things. It insulates really well. You can feel good about shipping packages, and it's not gonna, crush your electronics or anything like that. So Steelcase is using it for shipping furniture, but we turned it into a really fun research project. Inquiry-based project. Now, what the students did is they dug into and looked at the life cycle analysis, looking at polystyrene, looking at styrofoam, and then comparing it to the life cycle analysis of the mushroom materials. So we're talking, there's some really contrasting differences in terms of renewable feedstock versus petrochemical starting points. And then they biodegrade, which is fabulous. And unlike some of the other biodegradable plastics and the bioplastics out there, this is something that can truly be composted in your backyard. The stuff that you can get and play around with in the labs. So that is another really, really fabulous trait. So they were able to do all sorts of fun tests of thermal insulation impact. They were dropping stuff off of the bleachers. We had some students piloting that. They just had a blast. So, so yeah, here are a couple of pictures, and I will just give one anecdotal story about a student group that came to visit us. And we had a student who, her science fair was on Monday. They visited us on a Friday. She, for her science fair on Monday, which she, hadn't really put too much time in to thinking about before coming to visit us on Friday, but she won an honorable mention for her science fair project after just doing a weekend-long project looking at styro and mushroom materials because she got so into it. Anyway, there's ways that you can get this material. You can go to the Ecovative site. They have a grow your own kits that you can buy and play with, so it's a good time. Or you can go to the family fair and you can make your own and you can play around because we've got it there. So sharklet, Amy touched on it really quickly. So it is the shark denticles, and it has to do with the micron scale of preventing bacteria from growing on it. So what we were able to do with students, and this is again on the website. So the students took and analyzed sharklet materials, and they were able to look and just compare the two processes. So I'll just give you just one really, really quick snapshot, and this is the wrap up. The wrap up is for us to be doing green chemistry and biomimicry education across the spectrum. This is where we can have the most powerful impact, right? It's not enough for our professionals to have the training. We need to be training at the earliest levels because, for one, we need more chemists creating solutions to these problems, okay? We also need consumers more aware about how they can actually be impacting and making impacts and influencing policy, influencing companies, because everybody's got that power. So you guys have been fabulous. And it's totally time to wrap things up. So thanks so much for joining us. And that's us.